Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה. ברך נא אדוני אלוהינו דברי תורתך בפינו ופיך בית ישראל. ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאיהם בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל.
Amen.
Blessed art you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Adonai, our God, sweeten the words of your Torah in the mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed art you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people, Israel.
Amen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam asher banu min kol amim v'natan lanu torato. Baruch atah notenu Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Blessed art you, Adonai, God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed art you, Adonai, giver of the Torah.
Amen.
I don't think it's a waste of time to use the praise of Hashem's name in English, because English is our first language, honestly. Sham Kevin, I don't expect you to stand the whole of the shir. It's stressful to you.
I need to exercise. I've been sitting the whole time. I'm going to stretch as well, so just excuse me.
Okay, I get my exercise by jumping to conclusions. Okay.
Well, at least you know Kevin can stand you.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
All right, so listen, before we go quickly, before we go to the halachas, I know it's reversed with the camera. God, you're talking about a prophet's time. One of the reasons I said yesterday that we're moving from exactly, Kevin's got the book, moving away from the Mezuzah is because we're on the 35 lessons of the Mezuzah. And with respect to lockdown, I hardly see you having three males together unless they're from the same house. Whereas Lashon Hora can even be conducted over a phone call. So Lashon Hora is such a serious thing that it affects our Lamava greatly. In other words, a lot of the merits that we have can be put in jeopardy if we have negative speech about others, whether or not it's true or not. The secular view is always, but what? Why can't I say that? It's true. So Lashon Hora is saying damaging statements that are true. Let me just be clear. If it is lies or tale-bearing, there's something which is a complete lie. That's even worse. But just because it's true doesn't mean it's productive. And if just as a guideline to tell you that if you don't want people to say it around, if you would be awkward having that person overhearing the conversation, that's a good indicator something's wrong. It's just my barometer. In other words, if you would cringe, if the person heard what you said about them, not to their face, and you would really not be comfortable if they're there, you know you're doing something wrong. So there are 31 Torah prohibitions that are violated when you speak Lashon Hora. It's not all 31, but there are 31 with warnings. So if there's 31 and they're one for murder, that should tell you something. Not in terms of only the severity, but in terms of the fact that it's more common. All right, so I'm just going to read one thing quickly, then we're going to get into the Gemara. Obviously, the first one is Vayikra chapter 19, verse 16. You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people. This is a prohibition dealing specifically with Lashon Hora and Rechilus. Lashon Hora is the term used for a derogatory or damaging statement. Rechilus is the term used for a report that someone has spoken or acted against the listener. That's obviously far more damaging because there you're inciting hate. It's not just that you're embarrassing the listener, because it's like saying, oh, remember what such and such said about you, this is what they said. That's actually creating major drama. Both are prohibited even when true. When true, just as a peddler rochel goes from house to house selling his wares, so too a habitual gossip monger goes from person to person, picking up and leaving behind tidbits of derogatory information about others. That's said by Rashi. All right, so we're going to carry on with this false work with this work on false reporting and all sorts of other things every day. Are you guys happy to do this every day?
Yeah.
As a beginning. Sort of Lashon Hora. I think it's more relevant than how many people sit at a table and say Amen. I mean, I grew up secular. I don't know what you think, guys.
I think
and what the book's going to cover. Kev, I wanted to ask you something. The reason I like your book is because it covers in what situations you might have to speak Lashon Hara and how do you go about it. What happens if you need to warn somebody about a potential marital partner that's abusive? What happens if you know someone's going into business with somebody that's shady? How do you go about doing it in the most constructive way? What were you going to say, Kabb?
And if somebody, let's say you can help someone says, I know I try not to listen, but if I can help, if somebody tells me something about someone, I only want to help if I can help them. Maybe there's a leniency for that. If they tell me someone's acting in a certain way and I can assist them and I can try and help them, then maybe there's allowances for that.
You see, I agree with Kevin. There has been a situation. I mean, there was one particular situation where I remember ages ago, I actually communicated with Gavin because there was a guy that all of a sudden, from being nice, went to being threatening and nasty. And I thought, this guy has a screw loose. And Gavin and I knew the person in common. And I said, Gav, what do I do with this particular person? Because I don't actually know if it's something I did or if it's something they did. Here's the correspondence on WhatsApp. I need you to read it because this thing is going to erupt in absolute drama. Now, I don't know what I did, if it was right or wrong or to what degree, but I should have learned these halachas maybe better. But I actually never mentioned it to Gavin for the first few weeks. It's only when it started getting more and more out of hand that I said, but there's something off here. This is not coming right. So there are situations that Kevin's talking about that's completely correct, where, I don't know, that's what we're going to learn these halachas for, because life is chilled until somebody else acts a bit rogue. So actually, funny enough, we're going to discuss this in the Mishnah that we're going to go to do now. Not the new Mishnah, but a discussion that we had in 76b in Sanhedrin that's going to be brought up today about what happens if somebody acts, what do you call it, unconventionally, and your response is unconventional in return. Are you liable or are you not? And we're going to see how it's going to impact. All right, so let's just go to the Gemara quickly. All right, I'll tell you where we are. All right, we're on 24b2, 24b2. And I think that Arthur pointed this out to me, that I should say what page we're on in the beginning, and I should say what page we're ending on. Okay. I think, Arthur, that was a very good tip. You told me once before, and I think that was a good tip. And all the shiurim are labeled, and even though they're on YouTube, I'm going to send it to you guys so you know at what point we started and what point we ended. Does that make sense? And if I've got time, I'll even spoon feed you and give you the PDFs to learn previously. But I mean, that's there in the thing. All right, guys, let's get started. The Gemara presents a new inquiry that it will seek to resolve on the basis of our Mishnah. They inquired, if a person incites one's fellow's dog against another fellow, what is the law? Now, do you remember we touched this? I don't know if you guys remember in 23b. We touched this about, it went off on this discussion of Sanhedrin on 76b. Do you remember it hit that in the 23rd daf? 23b, it was in note 11 on your Schottenstein. I was in the Mamson Toti. So we said, what happens if a person has a snake or a dog and incites it against another individual? And the Sanhedrin brings death penalty cases, but it also brings cases of injury, which are brought from Bava Kamma. So it's going to address this issue again. It says the Gemara explains its inquiry. So if a person incites one's fellow dog against another person, what's the law? The Gemara explains its inquiry as follows. Now, the inciter is certainly not liable by the court to pay damages. Now, this, I think, was a very difficult thing to swallow. And there are two opinions about this. If you remember, if a snake that is incited by somebody to attack a person, and that snake kills somebody, Rav Yehuda turns around and said that person is liable, because at the point where the snake bites the person, that muscle reflex is involuntary, and therefore it will inject poison into the person. And therefore, when the person dies, it's as if one took a dagger with poison and stabbed the person with it. That's Rav Yehuda's opinion. The sages say that the snake has a voluntary muscle reflex, which means if the snake bites, it can choose how much poison to inject, and therefore the inciter is not liable for death. And that's why we stone the snake, because it's a hazardous animal, but we don't put the person to death via beheading. Does that make sense? Whereas Rav Yehuda is saying that the person knew that the snake had an involuntary muscle response, and therefore we put the person to death, but not the snake, because the snake didn't do anything wrong. So those were the two opinions in 76b. I'm just recapping. It's not in this Gemara. You won't find it in the notes. I'm just recapping from what I remember from memory. Okie dokie. So this kind of bugs me, because then why does it say that the inciter is not held liable for damages? Because you can only put a person to death generally for the death penalty for something that is a direct damage. So something known as groma, which is indirect damage, is something where that you'll be held responsible when a person goes to the next world. But in the terms of the base, then they can't give the person the death penalty. So say, for example, someone is shot with an arrow, but they have 3 or 4 days to remedy it with, antitoxin medication, herbs, etc. in those days. And they don't attend to it. Then it says in Sanhedrin that that person is liable. Not the one that shot the arrow, but the person that didn't remedy themselves, because there was a way to rectify the situation. What it's saying here is, since the inciter has not directly inflicted damage, but simply caused it, that's according to Rashi's explanation. So the one who caused it is morally obligated to make restitution, but the courts cannot make him do so. Does that make sense? Okay, so that is one opinion, right? So it's saying, okay, so fine, the inciter is certainly not held liable, but what about the owner of the dog? Do we say that the owner of the dog can say to the victim, what have I done to you? In other words, I never incited the animal. I owned the dog, but somebody else incited the animal. So what have I done to you directly? Does that make sense? So alternatively, what the Gemara says is, it says we can say to the person, since you knew about your dog that it was susceptible to being incited, you should not have kept such an animal. The Gemara seeks to resolve this inquiry. Rav Zaira said, come learn a proof from our Mishnah, which states, and it reverts to being a tum when children poke it and it does not gore. So what is the implication? Would it gore another ox as a result of the children's poking? The owner would be liable to pay damages. Thus, we see the owner is liable if his animal damages as a result of someone else inciting it. Okay? Guys, you following so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of remember this from the one show I listened to. You sent me on audio the one time. It's very similar to that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're saying is, listen, if the owner has an ox and children tease the ox and that ox damages another ox, it's still your ox, and therefore, you have to pay for that responsibility. So this seems to use as a proof that the owner has to pay for somebody else that aggravated his animal. This seems to be a proof. But the Gemara in the following stanza rejects the proof. It says, a buyer said, because a buyer doesn't agree with Rav Zaira, does the Mishnah state that if it gores, the owner is liable? Perhaps the Mishnah means that it would gore as a result of being incited. It is not restored to the status of a tum, but for that goring itself, the owner is not liable to pay. Okay, so what a buyer is basically saying is as follows, is that, listen, we cannot, according to Rabbi Meir, restore that animal to a tum status, because clearly it hasn't calmed down. But there were circumstances that caused it, that the children were aggravating and teasing it, and therefore when the children incited it to strike another animal, we don't make the owner pay for damages, but we certainly can't restore the animal to a tame status. That's a little bit over the top. Fine. The Gemara rejects this proof as well. Actually, the Gemara doesn't reject that proof. It just brings another proof. It says, come learn a proof from the following Mishnah. Obviously, this is in 76b of Sanhedrin. If one incited a dog against a person, or incited a snake against him, he is not liable. Does it not mean that the inciter is not liable, but the dog's master is liable? The Gemara rejects this proof as well. No. Say the Mishnah means that not only is the dog's master not liable, but even the inciter is not liable. All right. So what is it saying here? The first opinion is saying that it's asking a question. It's saying, okay, so we see the inciter is not liable, but isn't the dog's master liable? So it's coming to bring where Rav Zera and the buyer are bringing the proof from. And then the second statement is, no, it's rejecting this proof. It says that not only is the dog's master not liable, but even the inciter is not liable. Okay? Which means as follows. So the Mishnah meant, according to the Ravad and Rashba, that neither is liable because if it used the word, there's just one particular problem they have. If it used the word they are not liable, then we could have seen what? Both the inciter and the dog's owner is not liable. But because the Gemara said he is not liable, it comes to infer what? Guys, it comes to infer what?
What, that
He
he's not
isn't liable.
I'm saying if there are two parties involved, there's the inciter and the owner of the animal.
Okay.
According to Ravad and Rashba, it said the term should have been used patorim, which means they are not liable. It doesn't. It said he is not liable. So what does he is not liable imply?
the owner.
Oh no, the animal's not liable.
We don't know. It's saying that
That could be
one of them
right.
is not liable.
Yeah,
At least
the
one is
inciter
not
as well.
liable.
Okay.
That's it. So we don't know from the text. So the proposition could only be one or two things as follows. Is either that the inciter is not liable and the dog's owner is. When it says he is not liable, it's either that the owner of the animal is not liable, or alternatively, that the inciter is not liable. So the first proof is that we're saying that the inciter is not liable because he never directly did the damage. It's not like he smacked somebody directly. He aggravated the animal. Fine. Then the one that says the owner is not liable, but the inciter is, seems to imply that if you aggravate the animal and it does damage, that you've caused this and the owner knew nothing about it. Okay? But the other opinion is that you're not liable as the inciter, but what were you doing having an animal that was susceptible to being incited? Does that make sense? Those are the only two arguments. Fine.
Can I ask you something? Quickly?
Yeah.
Is the difference between an inciter that works for you or an inciter that is just on your premises like a friend or something?
No, well, in a way, it wouldn't make a difference because whether you hired somebody to walk your dog, let's say they work for you, according to your question, you're hiring them to walk your dog. You're not hiring them to take the animal to do debt collection. You know, where the guys are walking the dog and part-time is a debt collector where he takes two Rottweilers to somebody and says, you owe me money. I'm going to release the hounds, as they say in the Simpsons, you know. So the person never paid you to use it as a debt collection process. They hired you to walk the animal.
I'm saying slightly different. So the guy's got a farm, and on this farm, this is one of the workers on the farm, and he incites. He's never involved with the dog, and he's trying to shoo the dog away because he's getting near the crop, and he shoots it like he incites him, and the dog attacks somebody else. Or he purposely somebody else, but he actually works. He's under the employment of that guy permanently.
Okay, so that's
not a link there, I think.
Okay, but then in that particular case, that's not an intent of inciting the animal. That's intent of trying to control the animal to behave. If an animal is wild on its own volition and you're trying to shoo it away from hurting other people, there's never going to be a case against you.
Okay, okay, so then he didn't shoo him away. He incited him, but he actually is in his employment. That's what I'm trying. He belongs to that owner.
It doesn't make any difference.
Does it? Okay, that's fine. Carry on.
Because we look at, it's a good question, we look at pure, not relationship, we look at intent. What was the intention of the person that tried to do that particular behavior? Does that make sense? In other words, was it premeditated inciting, or was it a case where he's got no people skills and no animal skills? but his intention was whatever. So it has nothing to do with the relationship status at all.
Thank you.
Okay. It's the equivalent to saying even something else. It's that you've got a friend and they borrowed a weapon from you for target practice, for example, or you had it taken from you. If anything, I see what you're saying, that the owner could be more responsible because he has a relationship with the person. But
it's like when I had Deeper Divine, if one of the girls messes up somebody's hair, I'm responsible. I'm the owner.
No, but that's a different reason. I'll give you the reason. That reason is that they were paid for their expertise to help your clients.
Yeah, this is unrelated. You're right. Okay.
It's unrelated. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So
right.
what we're saying is the Tana might have considered it obvious that the master is not liable. Why? Because he hasn't done anything. The guy took his dog for a walk because he was paid to walk the dog, and therefore needed only to state that then Sata is not liable either. That's according to Ravad and Rashba. So it's saying, listen, we might assume the obvious. The owner hasn't acted badly at all. He never was involved in the situation. His animal was calm, and therefore the animal was used for nefarious purposes. It could be that the animal itself was not a dangerous animal. Everybody is liable, in my opinion, to being incited. You take a calm person and you start problems with their family to try and, if you take a generally calm person and you grab somebody's child and you start to shake them, I guarantee you that person, protective instincts will come, and a generally calm person would react very badly to that person. Believe me.
Test this yourself.
So,
you said, yeah, believe me. I wonder if you've had the theory tested.
No, I mean,
I'm joking and playing with you, man. I know. It's like they grab your pet.
All right, so let's just
if somebody grabbed your pet lizard, James, you'd also be go from calm to rage in about 3 seconds.
Yeah, but I'm actually got red hair. It doesn't take that much to send me off the edge. Really.
You grab my dog, you grab a cat, you grab anything that's mine. You'll turn me into,
exactly.
From the calm, lovey teddy bear into the wild bear you don't want to see.
Exactly. So let's conclude this Mishnah. We need to, so that we've got, all right. All right, so it says, come learn a proof from the following Mishnah. If he incited a dog against a person or incited a snake against them, the owner is not liable. But it does not mean that the inciter is not liable, but the dog's, does it not mean that the inciter is not liable, but the dog's master is liable? Let me just repeat that. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Come learn a proof from the following Mishnah. If one incited a dog against a person or he incited a snake against them, he is not liable, meaning the inciter.
Yeah.
Does it not mean that the inciter is not liable, but the dog's master is liable? And the Gemara rejects this proof. It says no. Says the Mishnah that not only is the dog's master not liable, but even the inciter is not liable. So this goes according to the Rashba and Ravad, which saying obviously the dog's owner is not liable. But in this case, we come to learn that even the inciter is not liable. Okay, because it's obvious that the dog's owner had nothing to do with it. Yeah.
Can you tell the difference between the dog's owner and the inciter? I'm a bit confused there. It's not exactly clear to me. I mean, I thought the owner was the person inciting.
No. Okay, so we're talking about when there's a third party. Meaning,
okay.
If you own the dog and you're inciting it against somebody, for sure you're liable. Because the dog trusts you, plus that as a member of your family, that when you're getting upset, that the dog is going to react badly. What we're talking here is you've hired somebody to walk your dogs. And then you find out that you've got a court case because your dog bit somebody and they want to put your dog down.
Okay. Now I get it. Okay, now I'm understanding it. Okay, fine. So basically it's like, it's not directly you. It's your dog, but somebody's walking it. And he puts it on somebody else. So, okay,
correct. So that's why it's bringing it up in this Mishnah, because it says you own an ox. And the kids are teasing it, and now this ox goes to gore another ox in temper because the kids were teasing it. you still have to pay for the damages. Okay.
Okay.
And then there was, that was according to Rav Zera. But Abaya said, no, you wouldn't have to pay for the damages because there was external circumstances that made the ox be agitated. And the Abaya said, however, according to Rabbi Meir, it still can't become tame because it did react when the children poked it. Yes, it didn't poke children, but it certainly poked another animal. So it can't get back to the tame status. But you're not responsible, according to Abaya, and according to Rav Zera, you are. Okay, let me just go on. I've got luck.
Thanks, Tim.
10.
Appreciate that.
Cool, man.
Good insight, Damon.
So, all right. So now we're learning the last bit of the ruling. Rava stated a ruling. Rava said, even if you conclude that where a person incites one fellow dog against another fellow, the dog's master is liable. If the victim incited it against himself, the dog's master is not liable. What is the reason for my ruling? Because whenever one acts irregularly and someone else comes along and acts irregularly against him, the second party is not liable to pay. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that Rava says that the dog's master is liable. If you have a third party that incites your animal against somebody else, you are liable. But if a second party incites the animal against somebody else and then the dog turns on him, the inciter, the owner is not liable. And it said it's not liable because he's acting very strangely with the dog and aggravating it. And therefore, the guy got what he deserved. The dog turned on him. The dog, so what's it equivalent to? You minding your own business and somebody comes and starts to shout at your wife and push your wife. If you hit them and break their jaw and send them to ICU, I don't know any court of the land that would hold up more than a minor assault charge in self-defense. Why? Because this person acted irrationally. And therefore, you defending yourself, or defending the ones you love against this irrational person, every person would understand where you're coming from. Do you understand what I'm saying? Guys?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not like you assaulted the person and started problems with him. In other words, he started drama with you and you defended yourself against that aggressive attack. He ended up physically the worse off, which he didn't expect, and therefore he wants to come and have a charge of assault against you and then a court case. Now, what you could say is, I defended myself. This guy got abusive to my spouse, and therefore I protected him. So it's very unlikely that anybody would find you remiss. Does that make sense? Because he acts regularly against you, and therefore you acting irregularly against him was normal reaction. A normal reaction. Okay. All right, let's go on. Rav Papa seeks to equate Rava's ruling with that of Reish Lakish. Okay? Do you remember we learned this in a previous brisa? We actually learned this on 28. Okay? I'm just going to tell you what it says. If there are two cows in the public domain, one squatting and one walking, then the walker kicked the squatter, the owner is not liable. Okay? But if the squatter kicked the walker, her owner is liable. So what we are saying is, in the public domain, Reish Lakish was saying that there are two animals. You have a right to walk in the public domain, but if the animal suddenly stopped and another animal behind kicked that animal because that animal stopped without reason, that animal that squatted without reason acted irregularly because the public domain is where an animal should just be walking.
Yeah.
And therefore, according to Reish Lakish, the other animal that kicked the squatting animal, the squatting animal acted irregularly, and therefore the ox or the cow that kicked in response to the irregular action is deemed not liable. However, if your animal is walking normally and another animal kicks you, they're absolutely liable if the animal kicks another animal because your animal was not acting irregularly.
Okay.
So that's Rav Papa's bringing forth Reish Lakish's argument. Now, Rava doesn't apply the two rulings as broadly. Let me give you an example. Rava said to Rav Papa, in that case, I rule that the walker is liable for kicking the squatter. For we can say to him, the walker and its owner, on behalf of the injured squatter, what do you have the right to do? To walk on me maybe, but to kick me you have no right. So what happens here is Rava is not applying Reish Lakish's rule as broadly. What he was saying is fine. If your animal suddenly stops irregularly and mine injures you by walking and slamming into you, fine, I understand why you have a payment case in that degree where you can't hold the other ox liable, because the ox kind of didn't know your animal was going to stop and it walked into you and injured you. So therefore, in that particular case, the injuring animal is not liable because that first animal just stopped suddenly. But if your animal kicked the other animal for simply stopping and squatting, I'll hold you liable because it's not a normal reaction. It doesn't give your animal the right to kick the animal that suddenly stops, because that is irregular and it's not warranted by animals suddenly stopping. It's one thing if the one bashes into another. It's a different thing if the one is aggressive and kicks the other. So Reish Lakish applies this much more broadly than Rava. Okay, so we finished that. And we've got 4 minutes left. So, guys, I think we can stop there.
Can I ask you a favor before you stop?
Sure.
Sorry, I lost my concentration for 1 second. Just Rava,
Sure.
I heard the second one. What did Rava say about in the public domain? What did he say?
Okay, so Rava, Rava said to Rav Papa, in that case, I rule the walker is liable for kicking the squatter. For we say to him, to the walker and its owner, on behalf of the injured squatter, what right do you have to do? To walk on me, yes, but to kick me, you have no right. In other words, Reish Lakish says that if one animal stops quickly, like without notice, and squats in the public domain, and the other animal, in response to an irregular action, acts irregularly and kicks that other animal, the injuring animal that damaged the squatting animal is not liable, because the one animal acted irregularly and so did the other behave irregularly. So the one cancels out the other. Rava says, no, I'm not going to apply it as broadly. If your animal suddenly stops and squats and another person's animal comes and bumps into you and injures your animal because it walked on it or smacked into it and there's injuries, I'm not going to hold you liable for that because your animal just bumped into the other one because the animal stopped without notice. But if your animal kicks the other animal for just stopping, then that's out of proportion.
Got it.
So
irregular behavior.
It's way more irregular and not warranted. It's like somebody comes to you. Let me just use this as an example as two people. And I mean, I remember I was at this camp. So there was this Indian and his wife, and she just went to the front of the queue. And I said to the husband, because I said, look, people have been waiting here at this camp in the queue. There is a queue. And I spoke like the church. He said, meet me outside. I'm going to stuff you up. I said, hang on a second. What are you talking about? There's actually a queue. He said, she was there first. Wait outside. I said, cool, bud. You want to wait outside? That's fine. I said, I think you're a moron, and I think it's a reasonable response. I spoke to you nicely. If you want to assault me on that basis, fine, let's wait outside. I said, that's fine. I said, but can you not explain to me, like a gentleman, that your wife was waiting in the queue before, and that would have sufficed. I shouted at you. I spoke to you, said, this is the sort of thing that Rava is talking about, where the reaction supersedes the irregularity.
Can I tell you something that happened to me about a month and a half ago? I went for a run, and I stopped to get a drink. You know, at AM, PM, Arthur?
Where?
AM, PM. That's like a 24-hour
store.
Like
24/7.
So I went to get this drink. So I'm standing in the queue there. I get my running, and this oak comes up to me, and he says in Hebrew, he says, "Lo tov zeh," and he's aggressive. I said, "Excuse me, I didn't know that. Relax, take it easy, calm down. Calm down." That's a good way of people that don't. If you tell them to calm down and relax, like I didn't know he was in the queue. There was a trolley there. You know what I mean? But people get upset over nonsense. It's stewart.
I'll tell you something,
Absolutely.
Kevin. It might work on a guy, but never tell your wife to calm down and relax, bro. It just makes the fire. It's opposite effect. Why do you mean I should calm down? you just duck the pans and everything.
Yeah, especially when you act the sentence. I think you're acting a little bit irrationally about this.
Oh man,
You need
that's
to-
like
Yeah.
just
That's
for
fuel on the fire. That's fuel on the fire.
that's from sleeping outside. Sleeping on the couch to sleeping outside. There's a difference.
Listen, I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Damon, sorry, this is actually more with what we're doing in Sanhedrin, but the guys might find it interesting. It's just a 2-minute thing, I hope.
Sure.
Okay, what I don't understand in Sanhedrin, what's the difference? You've got 4 different types of ways to put someone to death, the Sanhedrin or the Bet Din, and they can put it by beheading, by stoning, all of those type of things. Are they at spiritual? I know the one's considered higher than the other, punishment wise, but it all seems to be death is death. What's the difference? Is there a spiritual implication behind it being different?
Absolutely.
So what is it? Because I missed it at the beginning it wasn't at the beginning of Sanhedrin.
Okay. So the more stringent the death penalty, in other words, the more severe the death penalty is required, the more the transgression is more severe. So, for example, there's a difference about how Hashem sees different sorts of acts that warrant the death penalty. So, for example, adultery or incest is far more serious than, say, for example, A claps B and B hits its head and dies. Okay? Now, that is horrific. And one gets the death penalty, a life for a life. But it's very different to you having an incestuous relationship with your parent. It's a different level of revulsion. In other words, even in society, nobody condones murder. But even in today's most secular liberal society, incest is still frowned upon as not a game for the whole family. So that being said, on a serious note, is that certain things are much more abhorrent than others, and therefore require a much more severe reckoning for the soul to have a cleansing.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, that's what I was thinking actually while you were talking, that it's a kapora. Actually, I think about it. I asked the question. I did think about it. It has to be a kapora. The greater the punishment, the greater the kapora, basically. So it's a greater cleansing for that person.
Yeah, certain people do not ever make a kapora. I mean, there was a guy that I'll tell you, it's the most horrific thing I've read. Just give me one. All right, this is a book called Famous Last Words. Okay, people said before they died. Now, there was a mass murderer called Karl Hans Ram. He was responsible for the killing in Mississippi in 1930, 12 people, okay? This is what he says. I wish the whole human race had one neck and I had my hands around it. These are probably one of the most unrepentant words ever to be spoken by a condemned man before he was put to death. Now, guys, that sort of guy will never get a kapura in the next world. Can you imagine that his only obsession was to kill the whole world?
Okay, so,
pardon?
Was it ginger as well?
All right.
I just wanted to get a smile.
Yeah, Dad was asking.
I got a smile. Here we go. What a massive smile you got today, eh?
So it was
what big hands?
It's like
so what did he say? Sorry, I had to type a message. What did he do this oak in Mississippi? He was a serial killer.
People. Yeah, he strangled 12 people and he was put to death in 1930 in Mississippi. And Charles Panzam turned around before they hung him and said, I wish the entire population had one neck so I could put my hands around them to strangle them.
Yeah, something like that.
Somebody like that is finished. Guys, lovely to see you, hey? And tomorrow is the hectic one, hey?